Today we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one in particular will make you go haywire. A cave's dark, isolated environment is a deadly trap for someone struggling with depression, and that's what happened with this caver who wandered aimlessly through the underground maze for 34 excruciating days, pushing him to the brink of death. The second narrative follows a similar pattern. As always, viewer discretion is advised. The evening of December 18th, 2004, settled quietly over the hamlet of Madiran in southwestern France. Jean-Luc Verge, a 48-year-old caretaker at a local health center, left his home without saying much to his wife and 14-year-old son. Depression had been his constant companion for months, wrapping around his thoughts like a dark fog. He climbed into his Land Rover, tucking a bottle of whiskey and a pocket full of sleeping pills into his jacket, and drove up into the limestone hills that overlooked the village. As twilight faded into darkness, Jean-Luc steered his vehicle toward the gaping entrance of an abandoned mushroom farm built into underground caves. He sat for a moment in the silence, then clicked on his flashlight and stepped out, leaving the driver's door open behind him. He stumbled forward, carrying whiskey in one hand, into the underground caverns, an endless tunnel leading to underground caves. The abandoned farm wasn't simply a single cavern, but a sprawling underground labyrinth. Originally excavated as a chalk mine, the tunnel stretched for approximately 8 kilometers, 5 miles beneath the hills. A disorienting maze of blind corridors, twisting passages, and dead ends carved into the limestone. Jean-Luc walked deeper into the darkness, turning left, then right, with no particular destination in mind. Without a map or any guidance system, he was completely lost within minutes. The underground tunnels were so identical in their appearance that, when he tried to turn back, he had no way of knowing if he was retracing his steps or venturing deeper into the maze. Within hours, the batteries in his flashlight began to fail. The beam grew dimmer with each passing minute until it finally sputtered out, plunging him into absolute darkness. Without light, Jean-Luc's sense of direction immediately vanished. He continued forward, hands outstretched, feeling his way along the cold, damp walls. The ground beneath his feet grew increasingly soggy as he progressed through one particularly muddy corridor. The earth became a thick morass that clung to his shoes, creating a powerful suction. When he attempted to take another step, both shoes were pulled completely off his feet, swallowed by the mud with a soft, imperceptible sound. Now barefoot, Jean-Luc continued to stumble through the absolute darkness. The temperature in the caves remained a constant 12 degrees Celsius, 54 degrees Fahrenheit, cool enough to be uncomfortable for a man without proper clothing or shelter. His fingers trailed along the rough limestone walls as he searched for any hint of the exit. Each corridor led to another, identical in their darkness, indistinguishable in their twists and turns. Jean-Luc frequently thought he recognized a particular bend or texture in the wall, believing he had returned to a previous location, only to discover he was in yet another unfamiliar section of the maze. This false familiarity was cruelly deceiving. While he believed he might be circling back toward the entrance, he was actually venturing deeper into the bowels of the underground network. During those first 24 hours, Jean-Luc's initial confusion transformed into rising panic. The human hippocampus, that primitive region of the brain, equipped with millions of neurons designed to create cognitive maps of our surroundings, was rendered useless in the absolute darkness. Without visual cues or landmarks, his brain's navigation equipment failed completely. His sense of time began to distort as well. With no daylight to mark the passing of hours, the feeling of being hopelessly lost intensified with each step. What made his situation particularly maddening was the sensation that he was traveling in circles, yet every attempt to course correct only seemed to lead him deeper into the underground labyrinth. By the third day, hunger and thirst became Jean-Luc's primary concerns. His whiskey was gone, and he had never swallowed the sleeping pills. Desperately thirsty, he discovered that water occasionally dripped from the limestone ceiling. He positioned himself beneath these natural faucets, catching precious drops on his tongue. When the dripping was too slow, he pressed his mouth directly against the cave walls, sucking moisture from the porous stone. His stomach cramped with emptiness. After nearly a week underground, Jean-Luc began to adapt to his circumstances. Crawling on all fours through the darkness, he pawed at the ground like an animal, finding substances he could consume. He ate clay from the tunnel floor and gnawed on pieces of rotten wood left behind by the mushroom farmers. The material was barely digestible, but it quieted the gnawing pain in his stomach. Sleep came fitfully in this lightless world. Jean-Luc discovered old plastic tarpaulins abandoned by the mushroom farmers and wrapped himself in them for warmth, creating a nest in a relatively dry corner of the maze. Without the rhythms of day and night, his sleep patterns became erratic. Sometimes he would curl up for what felt like minutes, only to wake feeling as though days had passed. Other times he would wander for hours in a half-conscious state, uncertain if he was dreaming or awake. As the days stretched into weeks, Jean-Luc's psychological state underwent remarkable transformations. At times, despair would overwhelm him completely. During one particularly dark period, perhaps 2 weeks into his ordeal, though time had lost all meaning, he found a piece of rope left behind by the mushroom farmers. With methodical care, he fashioned it into a noose, in case things got unbearable. He kept this last resort with him as he continued his endless wandering. Yet, strangely, Jean-Luc also experienced unexpected moments of profound calm. As his mind adapted to the absolute disorientation, he sometimes slipped into meditative states, allowing his thoughts to soften and unravel. Instead of fighting against the darkness and confusion, he surrendered to it. In these moments, he floated through the tunnels in peaceful detachment, singing softly to himself, his voice echoing through the empty chambers. By the 4th week, Jean-Luc's body had undergone dramatic changes. His once robust frame had withered to skeletal thinness, with his 75-kilogram, 165-pound body losing nearly a third of its weight. His fingernails had grown long and broken from constant scraping against stone walls. A beard had sprouted from his face, growing to several inches in length, scraggly and untrimmed. His bare feet had hardened into calloused pads, adapted to the rough tunnel floors. His world had contracted to the immediate space around him. The reach of his arms, the sound of dripping water, the feel of the walls beneath his palms, the outside world with its sunlight, open spaces, and human connections had become abstract, almost mythological. In this sensory deprivation, his mind created its own realities. Sometimes he would hallucinate voices or glimpses of light where none existed. On January 21st, 2005, exactly 34 days after Jean-Luc first entered the tunnels, 3 teenage boys from the village decided to explore the abandoned mushroom farm. Just a few meters into the entrance corridor, they discovered the Land Rover, its driver's door still standing open, exactly as Jean-Luc had left it over a month earlier. Alarmed by this strange sight, the boys immediately contacted the police. Authorities dispatched a search team, which entered the labyrinth with powerful lights and proper equipment. After 90 minutes of methodical searching in a chamber just 180 meters, 600 feet, from the entrance, they found Jean-Luc Josua Verges. He was ghost pale from the absence of sunlight, emaciated to the point of being skeletal, and had grown a long, wild beard. But remarkably, he was alive. The team carefully extracted Jean-Luc from the tunnels and rushed him to the nearest hospital. Doctors were astonished by his condition. Despite severe dehydration and malnutrition, he had no life-threatening injuries. The human body's remarkable ability to adapt had allowed him to survive on minimal sustenance in an environment that should have been fatal within days. News of Jean-Luc's survival quickly spread through French media outlets. Reporters dubbed him Le Miracle des Ténèbres, the miracle of darkness. His story captivated the public, rivaling even the most dramatic tales of survival by mountain climbers or shipwreck victims. When he was well enough to speak, Jean-Luc recounted the details of his ordeal: the clay and rotten wood diet, the water sucked from cave walls, the plastic tarpaulin bedding. What fascinated psychologists and journalists alike were Jean-Luc's descriptions of his mental states during the ordeal. The human brain, when stripped of its ability to navigate and deprived of sensory input, had responded in unexpected ways. His oscillations between despair, deep enough to contemplate suicide, and meditative calm, profound enough to find peace in absolute darkness, highlighted the brain's remarkable plasticity. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have relied on our powerful hippocampus to create cognitive maps of our surroundings. This navigation equipment, far more sophisticated than our modern lifestyle requires, is a biological inheritance from our nomadic ancestors, for whom getting lost meant certain death. When Jean-Luc's brain encountered an environment where this equipment was rendered useless, the lightless, featureless maze of the tunnels, it initially responded with panic, then adaptation, and finally with altered states of consciousness. Jean-Luc's experience demonstrated that when humans lose their bearings completely, the brain can either spiral into terror or, paradoxically, discover unusual freedom. This next story showcases how a situation can go from nothing to life and death battle in mere seconds. The morning of August 14th, 2001, dawned bright and warm in Montana. Summer vacation was winding down, and for the 5 teenagers gathered in the small town near Lick Creek, this was one of their last adventures before the school year began. Jennifer Rochelot, 19, was looking forward to her sophomore year of college. Today she was cave exploring with her younger sister Vanessa, 17, along with their friends Chris Castle, 19, his brother Andrew, 17, and Derek Lute, 17. They had planned the trip to Lick Creek Cave for weeks. The cave was popular among local teens, requiring no permits, and offering an accessible adventure in Montana's rugged landscape. The group had packed what they considered adequate equipment: flashlights, water bottles, snacks, and a knotted rope they'd found in Chris's garage. None of them had proper helmets, climbing harnesses, or the specialized equipment that experienced cavers would recognize as essential. Jennifer wore comfortable jeans and a gray cotton sweatshirt that her boyfriend had given her. Clothing that felt practical for a summer day that would be spent mostly underground, where temperatures hovered around 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. By 10:30 a.m., they had parked their Jeep at the small dirt lot that served as the unofficial trailhead to Lick Creek Cave. They hiked the short trail to the cave entrance, excitement building with each step. Jennifer had been here once before, 2 summers ago, but for Vanessa, it was her first caving experience. Derek, who had trained as a medical specialist during his first summer with the National Guard, felt confident that his skills would keep everyone safe if trouble arose. The main entrance to Lick Creek Cave was a dark mouth in the limestone hillside, approximately 2 meters, 6.5 feet, tall, and 3 meters, 10 feet wide. Cool air rushed out to meet them as they switched on their flashlights and ducked inside. The limestone walls quickly closed in around them, and within minutes, the sunlight from the entrance had faded to a distant glow behind them. They moved deeper into the cave. About 90 meters, 295 feet from the entrance, they arrived at what regular visitors to Lick Creek Cave called the Drop, a 4.5 meter, 15-foot descent to the lower level of the cave system. Chris took out the knotted rope and secured it around a sturdy-looking limestone projection at the edge of the drop. He tugged on it several times to test its strength before tossing the rope down into the darkness. After a final check, Chris gripped the rope and began descending hand over hand, using the knots as footholds. When he reached the bottom safely, he gestured for the next person to follow. Jennifer volunteered, eager to prove her experience from her previous visit. She grasped the thin rope, which was only about 1 centimeter, 0.4 inches, in diameter, and began lowering herself carefully over the edge. The rope felt rough against her palms as she descended, her feet seeking the knots below, with her flashlight tucked into her jeans pocket. About halfway down, disaster struck. The loose-fitting sweatshirt Jennifer wore, given to her by her boyfriend, caught on one of the knots in the rope. She paused, trying to free the fabric with one hand, while maintaining her grip with the other. For a moment, she hung suspended in the darkness, her arms beginning to tremble with the strain of supporting her entire body weight of 61 kilograms, 134 pounds. Jennifer twisted her body, attempting to unhook her sweatshirt from the knot. The motion caused her to begin spinning slowly on the rope, her body turning in complete circles as she dangled helplessly 2.5 meters, 8 feet above the cave floor. The cave walls revolved around, intensifying her disorientation with each rotation. Her arms burned with the effort of holding on, fingers cramping against the thin rope as she continued to spin. While struggling to maintain her grip, her palms grew slick with sweat, her muscles trembling from exertion and fear. After nearly 30 seconds of desperately clinging to life, Jennifer's fingers, unable to maintain their hold on the rough rope, finally slipped. She fell through the darkness, her body twisting in the air as she plummeted face down toward the cave floor. During the 3-meter, 10-foot drop, her left shoulder violently struck a protruding rock jutting from the cave wall, The impact spun her body, flipping her over, so that when she finally struck the ground, she landed hard on her back on top of the jagged breakdown rocks below. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. It crashed through her body in waves, centered in her lower back and pelvis. Jennifer lay stunned on the cold cave floor. The wind knocked from her lungs, unable to make a sound. Above her, her sister's horrified gasp echoed off the cave walls. Chris was at her side in seconds. Jennifer was conscious but gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face as the initial shock gave way to excruciating pain. Her whispered words about the agony in her back were barely audible in the vast darkness of the cave. While Chris stayed with Jennifer, Vanessa, Andrew, and Derek scrambled to find an alternate route down, a small side passage that switched back down to the same level, allowing them to avoid the treacherous drop. Within minutes, they had joined Chris at Jennifer's side. Derek, drawing on his medical training, carefully assessed Jennifer's condition. He checked her vital signs and tested her responses methodically. Jennifer could feel when he touched her feet and hands, and could move her fingers and toes, crucial signs that her spinal cord might be intact despite her injuries. The pain was most intense in her lower back and pelvis, areas where Derek suspected serious damage had occurred. After completing his assessment, Derek consulted with the others. Though Jennifer had feeling and movement in her limbs, her injuries were clearly serious. The group faced a difficult decision: wait in the cave for professional help, or attempt to transport Jennifer out themselves. Given the remote location and the urgency of Jennifer's condition, they determined that moving her themselves was the best course of action, despite the risks involved. Chris, the strongest of the group at 82 kilograms, 180 pounds, carefully positioned himself to carry Jennifer on his back. With agonizing slowness, he began crawling toward the entrance, Jennifer clinging to him, every movement sending spasms of pain through her damaged spine and pelvis. Chris carried her out through the small passageways when the tunnel widened enough to stand, measuring about 1.5 meters, 5 feet in height. The others took turns helping to carry Jennifer. After nearly 2 hours of painstaking progress, they glimpsed daylight ahead. Emerging into the bright Montana afternoon, they carefully loaded Jennifer into the back of their Jeep. They drove to the hospital in Great Falls, some 80 kilometers, 50 miles away. At the emergency room, X-rays and detailed scans confirmed what Derek had suspected. Jennifer had suffered 5 fractured vertebrae and a severely fractured pelvis in her fall. She was rushed into surgery. Jennifer would spend the next 8 days in the hospital, followed by 3 months of intensive physical therapy.